All right, let's begin. So these two chapters on abstraction and God are, I would say, the two most difficult in this book. Whitehead tells us that he's going to leave behind his historical account of the rise and fall of scientific materialism. And in these chapters, he's now going to take a dispassionate, he's going to engage in a dispassionate consideration of the nature of things, antecedent to any special investigation into their details, right? So he's exploring generality, which for Whitehead is basically what metaphysics is all about. Metaphysics is the attempt to find the most general description possible for our experience. And he tells us how he's going to justify his engagement in metaphysics, because he realizes that many of his readers or people in the audience, when he was delivering this as a lecture, may find metaphysics irksome. And so he even says, go ahead and skip this chapter if you're not into this form of analysis. But nonetheless, he says that he thinks this is justified in three ways. First, his metaphysics is justified experientially by way of a description of actual occasions, the actual occasions composing our immediate awareness of fact. He thinks his metaphysics is justified as well systematically, which is to say that it will bring many types of actuality into harmony. And finally, he justifies his metaphysics in what I'm calling an onto-epistemic way, meaning that the account of what there is to be known reveals also how we can know it. And so in Whitehead's account, knowledge becomes an adjunct within things known, rather than, say, knowledge being a kind of view from nowhere. So he really wants to link together epistemology and ontology, which is why I refer to that as his onto-epistemic justification. So this is a red balloon. I tried to offer some concrete examples here. Whitehead says that the foundation of his metaphysical position is that the understanding of actuality requires a reference to ideality, right? So when we're experiencing a red balloon, Whitehead's saying in the background of this experience of an actual entity is this sort of halo of possibilities, right? Every actual entity, in order to be understood, in order to understand it, we're going to need to make reference to this realm of ideality. And so, in other words, this red balloon contains certain ideal characteristics, right? It's red and it is spherical, just to give two examples. And what makes these ideas, or what he'll call eternal objects, is that they can also participate or ingress in other actual entities, right? Red can ingress into a stop sign just as much as a balloon, and this spherical shape can ingress into a star just as much as into a balloon. And then Whitehead says that there is another relationship that these eternal objects have to the realm of possibility as such. And so red is related to other colors, and the spherical shape is related to a whole class of, you could say, ovals or circles. And Whitehead wants to remind us that there's real relevance. There's a real relevance of untrue propositions for each actual occasion, which is to say that there's something about our ability to recognize a red balloon that presupposes a sort of unconscious grasp of the fact that it's say it's not a blue balloon. And so even though we're not conscious of the untrue propositions, they're there in the background, Whitehead says. And it's all those untrue propositions which allow us to recognize the concrete fact before us. Because, as he puts it, actuality is a selection issuing in a gradation of possibilities in respect to their realization in that occasion. So we'll return to some of these ideas. So another way of thinking about these eternal objects is as a realm of alternative suggestions, right, that could be actualized. Blue could have been actualized in this red balloon, but it was not. So let's learn a bit about how Whitehead is characterizing these eternal objects. He tells us that eternal objects have both an individual essence as well as a relational essence. The individual essence would be its each eternal object's unique contribution to an actual occasion, and its relational essence is each eternal object's determinate relation to other eternal objects. So eternal objects in their determinate relations to one another this is a form of internal relationship, Whitehead says, by which he means each eternal object is constituted by its relations to one another, right? And there's a systematic and necessary relationship among all the eternal objects in this realm of possibilities. Now, on the other hand, eternal objects in their relationship to actual occasions are indeterminately related. They're externally related, in other words, right? So eternal objects among themselves are internally related, whereas the relationship between eternal objects and actual occasions is an external relationship. And Whitehead puts it this way. He says, eternal objects are possibilities with patience for relationship to actual occasions. So while an eternal object, when you consider it as just an abstract entity, cannot be divorced from its reference to other eternal objects, right, from its internal relationships to other eternal objects, in terms of an eternal object's relationship to an actual entity, there's indeterminacy here. In other words, each eternal object has patience for many actual occasions. It could ingress in different ways in different actual occasions. And so what's indeterminate in an eternal object's relation to an actual occasion is the gradation of realization, right? And so some of an eternal object's internal relations will be more relevant or more valuable to a particular actual occasion than others will. And this is important because Whitehead doesn't want us to imagine the relationship between eternal objects and actual occasions as one of imitation, like in Plato's account of the ideal forms. He says, in Whitehead's scheme, actual occasions don't simply mirror eternal objects. Instead, there's a creative synthesis of eternal objects, a realized togetherness of eternal objects, which is achieved in an actual occasion. So it's not about mimicry or imitation or mirroring, as in the Platonic scheme. So the external relationship of an eternal object to an actual occasion, that is its indeterminate mode of ingression, is how that eternal object's relational essence is graded as to its relevant aesthetic value for that occasion. So the synthetic prehension, Whitehead doesn't use the term concrescence yet, but that's what he'll use in his next book, Process and Reality, to talk about synthetic prehension. So this concrescence is achieved by a particular occasion as the solution of the indeterminateness of its relation to the realm of possibility into the determinateness of spatio-temporal actualization. So in other words, the process of actualization is one wherein incompatible possibilities are made compatible in an aesthetic harmony, right? And so while in the realm of possibilities, there's always going to be incommensurables, there's going to be contradictions, contraries present, certain possibilities that cannot both be actualized. But when you actualize, there's a determinateness which is achieved. And Whitehead's saying this is like a solution of the indeterminateness in the realm of possibility. So he says every actual occasion is the solution of all modalities into actual categorical ingressions. Truth and falsehood take the place of possibility. So I want to try to give us a picture of what he's talking about here. So above the line is the realm of possibility, right? It's the realm of incompatible maybes, right? Below the line would be actuality. It's the realm of truth and falsehood. And so in this realm of possibility, you know, there could be many things. There could be a stop sign. There could be a star. There could be, etc. Whereas in the realm of actuality, once these eternal objects ingress into the aesthetic harmony achieved by an actual occasion, we say there is a red balloon, right? Actuality is the realm of truth and falsehood in the sense that the eternal objects that are realized in an actual occasion have to be compatible with one another. In the realm of possibility, you know, all of the possibilities are there, even the incompatible ones. And so this is why Whitehead's referring to this process of ingression and aesthetic achievement as a solution to the problem of indeterminateness in the realm of possibility. Once eternal objects actualize, they're subject to the law of non-contradiction, right? This balloon cannot be both blue and red. So here I think he's engaging in dialogue with quantum theory and what's described in terms of the collapse of the wave function, or, I mean, think of Schrodinger's cat here, right? While in the realm of possibility, before we've looked or measured or observed, and that's when we would be in the realm of actuality. In the realm of possibility, the cat can be dead and alive. But once actualized, we need to decide, is it one or the other? So then Whitehead tells us that there is a general fact of systematic mutual relatedness, which is inherent in the character of possibility. In this general fact, he says, is the four-dimensional spatio-temporal continuum, right? Which itself is a selective limitation or a locus of relational possibility within the more general systematic relationships among eternal objects. So it's a limited locus. And space-time is a limited locus inherent in the actual course of events in the history of the cosmos. But in terms of all of the possible relations in the realm of eternal objects, it's the spatio-temporal mode of relationship is somewhat arbitrary, right? It's a selection among more abstract possibilities. So this is a clip I'm going to show a few minutes from I Heart Huckabees. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I'm going to use this as an example. I'm going to disagree with the way that Dustin Hoffman here, he's playing an existential detective trying to help this other guy out with some of his existential problems. I'm going to disagree with his characterization, and hopefully it will illustrate how Whitehead's understanding of the realm of possibility is a sort of unique contribution to the typical way that the universe is understood.
Okay, let's get started.
Is this part of my investigation?
Yes. Say this blanket represents all the matter and energy in the universe, okay? You, me, everything. Nothing has been left out, all right? All the particles, everything.
What's outside this blanket?
More blankets, that's the point.
Blanket's everything.
Exactly. This is everything, okay? Let's just say that this is me, right? And I'm, what, 60-odd years old, and I'm wearing a gray suit, blah, blah, blah. And let's say over here, this is you, and you're, I don't know, you're 21, you've got dark hair, etc. And over here, this is Vivian, my wife and colleague. And then over here, this is the Eiffel Tower, right? It's Paris. And this is a war, and this is a museum, and this is a disease, and this is an orgasm, and this is a hamburger.
Everything is the same, even if it's different.
Exactly. But our everyday mind forgets this. We think everything is separate, limited. I'm over here, you're over there, which is true, but it's not the whole truth, because we're all connected. Because we are connected.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, now.
Okay, that's enough. So Dustin Hoffman here says this blanket represents all the matter and energy in the universe, and nothing is left out. And if we take him literally, he's correct. He's leaving nothing or non-being or all the unactualized possibilities out. So there's this, it's a metaphysical paradigm we could call actualism, which is what Whitehead is combating. Whitehead wants to say, no, in order to understand the actual universe, we have to make reference to a realm of ideal entities, right, which may not be present at any given moment of the universe's history, but nonetheless are relevant to its ongoing unfolding. And so this blanket example is helpful for recognizing the interconnection among all things, but in Dustin Hoffman's rendering, he's only talking about the relations of already actualized things. Whitehead's bringing in the relationship that actual things have to possibilities, to potentials. And so basically Whitehead wants to show in this analysis of abstraction how it is that we're not just connected to one another as actualities, we're connected to one another in a way in the way that allows possibilities to be folded in. And it's only because unrealized possibilities, which strictly speaking do not exist, it's only because of our relationship to this realm of potentials that there can be a creative advance. If everything was already actualized, and if Dustin Hoffman was right about the blanket containing everything, all the matter and energy in the universe, if that's all there was, then change or evolution is merely the rearrangement of those pre-existing parts. There's no real novelty, right? Because at least in Whitehead's view, novelty requires the ingression of possibilities that have never been realized anywhere in the universe. So Whitehead says that each actual occasion is prehensively synthesizing or compressing the entire realm of eternal objects, but doing so with aesthetic gradations determining the relevant value of each object for the occasion. So every occasion is thus, Whitehead tells us, a self-creative synthesis of positively prehended being, meaning those objects that are individually effective in the aesthetic synthesis, and negatively prehended non-being, which is the systematic substratum of unfilled alternatives. So every occasion, every occasion as it arises is including not only the rest of the actual universe, but the entire realm of possibility, which is an infinite realm. But some of those possibilities it prehends positively and says, yes, this is included in my experience. And other possibilities it prehends negatively and says, those are not relevant, right? And so this gradation of increasing relevance and increasing irrelevance is what allows something finite to be experienced. But nonetheless, the finitude is achieved by in an aesthetic way, in terms of the value for the possibilities. There's always a halo of irrelevant possibilities around every definite fact, right? So to further analyze eternal objects, Whitehead says that as internally related to one another, eternal objects are isolated possibilities, lacking value. Value comes from actualization, right? So eternal objects, when considered in abstraction from actuality, they have achievable, but as yet unachieved aesthetic togetherness. Eternal objects achieve the emergent value of realized togetherness only through their ingression into actual occasions. So it's when actual occasions bring eternal objects together that their value, their aesthetic value is realized. And prior to this actualization, eternal objects remain isolated, right? They don't have any realized togetherness. So eternal objects can be graded in their isolation. So just considering them in abstraction from actuality, they can be graded according to abstractive hierarchies. At the base of this abstractive hierarchy would be simple eternal objects, which cannot be further decomposed. I'll give an example of this in a second. In between would be proximate objects, and then at the vertex would be the most complex eternal objects. There are many such abstractive hierarchies in the realm of possibility. And after eternal objects have ingressed into the realized togetherness of an actual occasion, eternal objects become relationally graded in what Whitehead calls an associated hierarchy that characterizes that actual occasion, right? So abstractive hierarchies are just how eternal objects are related in the realm of possibility, detached from actuality, whereas associated hierarchies are how eternal objects enter into relationship with one another after they've been actualized. So every actual occasion has this associated hierarchy of eternal objects, again, like this halo of possibility that hovers around what has been actualized. So an example of an abstractive hierarchy would be the Platonic solids, right? So the tetrahedron would be the simplest regular solid. So it's at the base of the abstractive hierarchy of regular solids, right? And then the dodecahedron would be the vertex, right? With the octahedron, the hexahedron, and the icosahedron as the proximate eternal objects that are of intermediate complexity, right? We could also define an abstractive hierarchy more broadly and just say we want the abstractive hierarchy of regular shapes rather than regular solids. And in that case, we could see how the tetrahedron can be further decomposed, right? Analyzed into flat triangles, and then those can be further decomposed into lines, which can be further decomposed into points, right? And so if we're looking at the abstractive hierarchy of regular shapes, the point would be at the base of this new abstractive hierarchy. This isn't really that important of a point, but it's Whitehead wants to avoid some confusions about the nature of abstraction. We have to distinguish whether we're talking about abstraction in reference to the realm of possibilities or abstraction in reference to the realm of actuality. Abstraction from possibility, he says, runs in the opposite direction to abstraction from actuality, so that when we're talking about actual occasions, simple eternal objects like colors, say the color of red, represents the extreme of abstraction. Whereas, again, in the realm of actuality, complex eternal objects bring us nearer to the concrete fact. So, an example of a complex eternal object would be that eternal object which is characteristic of like a human being's personality, right? When we are in the realm of actuality, that complex eternal object that is characteristic of the personality of an individual brings us nearer to the concrete fact of that person's existence. On the other hand, in the realm of possibility, it's not the complex eternal objects that are more concrete, it's the simple eternal objects, which are minimally abstract. And so there's a sort of inversion depending on which side of that line you're on. If you're in the realm of possibility or if you're in the realm of actuality, the meaning of abstraction is different. So one more one more point Whitehead makes to avoid confusion about abstraction is to distinguish himself from Aristotle and Aristotle's understanding of logical classification in terms of genera and species, which Whitehead says is useful for the analysis of actual fact, like biological taxonomy, for example. But it's not as useful for the analysis of metaphysical possibility. And Whitehead thinks that this classificatory logic is distorting in the context of an analysis of possibility. When you think about the example I gave of an abstractive hierarchy, you can see how genera and species doesn't really get at the sort of mathematical hierarchy that Whitehead's trying to describe there. And another issue with the Aristotelian approach is the ambiguity in the definitions of universal and particular. These aren't refined enough for Whitehead's purposes. And so he'll put it in process and reality, just showing the ambiguity in these two terms. Every so-called universal is particular in the sense of being just what it is, right? So this is why he comes up with the term eternal object rather than universal. Yes, eternal objects are like universals in that they can characterize more than one actual entity, like red can be the red of a stop sign, the red of a balloon, and so on. But still, each eternal object is particular in the sense of being just what it is, right? Similarly, every so-called particular is also universal in Whitehead's scheme in the sense that it enters into the constitution of other actual entities. So we can't just say that actual entities are simply particulars, because particulars are not supposed to be able to enter into the constitutions of other particulars. But as Whitehead has described his scheme, actual entities take one another up into themselves, right? And so we can't understand the abstractive hierarchies that Whitehead is proposing simply in terms of the relationships among universals and particulars because of this ambiguity. Okay, now this is where you think if you've grasped what Whitehead has been saying so far, now he shifts into a higher gear that you didn't know was lying in wait, because he tells us that so far he's just been focusing on actual occasions as natural events. In other words, he's only been discussing the physical poles of actual occasions, right? It's a partial picture. In their full concreteness, he reminds us that actual occasions also include a mental pole. And the mental pole is that which in cognitive experience would take the form of memory, anticipation, imagination, and thought. So he needs to make this distinction between the physical pole and the mental pole for the following reason. In the physical pole, eternal objects and their infinite associated hierarchies have full concrete ingression, right? Whereas in the mental pole, there's only partial ingression of eternal objects and their associated hierarchies. So this partiality, Whitehead also characterizes as the abruptness of the ingression of eternal objects into the mental pole. And this is important for him because he's trying to justify the possibility of finite conceptual knowledge. And so he's saying that in the physical pole, when we're experiencing the realm of what's the actualized facts of the past, say, because the eternal objects that are ingressed in that physical pole include an infinite associated hierarchy, we can never exhaustively characterize them in terms of concepts. Concepts for Whitehead are partially ingressed eternal objects, which have finite associated hierarchies. And so this is why when we're talking about, when we're trying to define something conceptually, we can have one idea in mind, one concept in mind that doesn't include this infinite associated hierarchy. And this is important for Whitehead because he's trying to justify the correspondence theory of truth, whereby, at least in conceptual terms, again, not in terms of our physical experience, but in our conceptual experience, when I have in mind the eternal object red, it's the same eternal object that's ingressing in the stop sign or the balloon. And so there's a correspondence between my concept and the thing that I am knowing. Now, this point is, I admit, this point was a bit obscure and remains a bit obscure to me. I'm trying my best to explain it here, but I think what he's trying to say is that I thought of it being similar to Kant's distinction between the sublime and the beautiful, in the sense that Whitehead is saying in the physical pole, experience is sublime in the sense that there's this a sort of infinitude to it that we can't grasp and determine conceptually, right? Whereas in our mental experience, we can, through this abruptness, we can cut off certain concepts from the infinite associated hierarchy, which holds true in the physical pole. We'll probably have to come back to this. Okay, so I should wrap up very quickly here. I want to talk about the role that God plays in Whitehead's account of abstraction. He begins this next chapter criticizing Aristotle, but he also doesn't hesitate to call him the greatest metaphysician. Why? Because he says Aristotle was the last European philosopher to dispassionately consider the topic of God or theology. Once Christianity took hold, it was no longer possible, Whitehead thinks, to be dispassionate in these sorts of metaphysical discussions. Religious emotion just became too prominent a factor. So Whitehead is doubtful as to whether the metaphysician in their dispassionate analysis can get further than Aristotle. He says, at least in terms of a logical consideration of the issue, he does leave open the possibility of increasing our understanding of God through experience. Whitehead read William James, Varieties of Religious Experience. He thinks there's more that we might say about the nature of God on an experiential basis, but in this chapter, he's focusing on what we can say about God logically. So I'll bracket what he'll end up doing with this empirical analysis of the divine. So he says that Aristotle's notion of God as the prime mover was based obviously on an erroneous physical cosmology, and so that exact argument fails. But despite all the progress that's been made in physics and in logic, Whitehead still thinks that some analogous metaphysical problem remains to be solved. The problem to be solved in Whitehead's world of becoming is no longer the problem of the source of motion as it was for Aristotle. Rather, it's the source of limitation that is the problem looking for a solution. Every actual occasion is a limitation imposed on possibility, Whitehead says. So where does this limitation come from? Whitehead says God provides the prime limitation. So rather than God as prime mover, it's God as principle of concretion or principle of limitation. Whitehead says that actuality is through and through togetherness, togetherness of otherwise isolated eternal objects, and togetherness of all actual occasions. So Whitehead conceives of God then as the source of the concrete togetherness of the universe, which would otherwise remain in indeterminate disjunction. So God is that by reason of which there is concrescence. God is the instigator of aesthetic synthesis in each occasion of experience. To the extent that there is unity in the universe, whether the unity of the whole or that of any of its parts, God is its efficient and final cause. So God is the generic fact, ingredient in all experiences by virtue of which metaphysical description is possible for finite minds like us, right? So without God to bring unity, there could not be, we as finite minds could not give a categorical account of the nature of reality. This is a bit like the role of God in Whitehead is sort of like a cosmological version of Kant's unity of apperception, the transcendental unity of apperception, right? Whitehead doesn't locate this source of the unity of things in the human mind. He locates it in the cosmos, right? As God as a cosmological function provides this unity. So it's not a transcendental account as in Kant, it's a cosmological account. So we are capable of metaphysical description in terms of categorical determinations of unbounded possibility, because in addition to our physical prehensions of the temporal past and the spatial present, we also conceptually prehend the full sweep of eternal relatedness through our participation in what Whitehead calls God's graded envisagement. Whitehead says this graded envisagement is how the actual includes what in one sense is not being as a positive factor in its own achievement. It is the source of error, of truth, of art, of ethics, and of religion. By it, fact is confronted with alternatives. So Whitehead will later call this graded envisagement the primordial nature of God. That's the phrase he comes up with in Process and Reality. Two more slides here. Whitehead, at the end of this chapter, compares his scheme to Spinoza's, identifying his, what he calls substantial activity, which he'll later call creativity. He identifies this with Spinoza's one infinite substance, but there are certain significant differences between Whitehead's and Spinoza's scheme. Whitehead says that the attributes of creativity are its character of individualization into a multiplicity of modes, and the realm of eternal objects which are variously synthesized in these modes. Thus, eternal possibility and modal differentiation into individual multiplicity are the attributes of the one substance. So rather than thought and extension being the attributes, it's these individual modes. So he's clearer on this difference with Spinoza in Process and Reality, where he says that Spinoza bases his philosophy upon the monistic substance, of which actual occasions are inferior modes, whereas the philosophy of organism inverts this point of view. So rather than a monistic substance, Whitehead's substantial activity is plural, right? It individualizes itself into actual occasions. And these actual occasions do not have sort of deficient status in Whitehead's cosmos, unlike modes in Spinoza's cosmos. This is just a long excerpt from Whitehead. I'll leave this, maybe we'll come back to this. It's what I'm calling Whitehead's aesthetic argument for the existence of God, which is not one of the classical forms of argument. It's a new form of argument for the existence of God, but let's come back to that. I'll pause now so that we can discuss all of this craziness.
Wow, Matt, that was just fascinating. Matthias, is it okay if I give a comment, like a general one, and then get back to you? Is that okay? Okay, marvelous. I think that, and yeah, I mean, probably everybody can say this later on, but I think that we can all agree that this was a kick-ass presentation, Matt. So really kudos, and as Germans would put it, hood up, right, Matthias? So hat off.
I hope it made some sense.
Yeah, I did, for sure. I mean, one has to qualify this, of course, and if I didn't read this 2 times on my own before this, it's almost impossible to follow, you know, because of the very specific terminology. That's the main point. You just kind of get lost in the possibilities and actualities and, you know, actual occurrences and eternal objects and so on and so forth. So my comment, it's like a general comment that then leads into a general objection or a concern with regards to what's been said. So to start off on a more positive note, in the sense of Varela's building bridges, or if I use the Whiteheadian terminology of establishing concrete togetherness. So what I find really interesting and fascinating, and also very illuminating, in the sense that it exemplifies very clearly a certain impetus that seems to be present in the 20th century philosophy in this particular passage, is something that you really find in almost all great thinkers of this period. And that seems to be, if I may use this somewhat broad term, a rehabilitation of the possible or the virtual or the indeterminate. So there is, you know, there's a growing realization that we have to kind of get away from this idea that clare et distincte is, so this clear and determinate, that this is basically the criterion of both knowledge and also ultimately of ontology. And what Whitehead is doing here seems to be very much in line with what you find in Bergson and what you find in Deleuze and Merleau-Ponty and many other authors on the one hand, and on the other hand also in the realm of science. So as you so rightly pointed out, there's a very strong analogy to what, you know, Whitehead is doing and the developments in the domain of quantum mechanics. So this really, if you really want to understand this, it would seem that somehow indeterminate and possible has to re-enter the story. And of course, you know, what happens here is like this very strong wish or desire or need to develop new terminology and new vocabulary, which to many is very frustrating. But again, a very interesting commonality again to be seen here, for example, between Husserl, Heidegger, Whitehead, Merleau-Ponty, and others. People say, you know, why do they write in such obscure way? Well, they're basically trying to develop different ways of thinking and talking about things that are in them, I would say, very similar. And one of them is precisely this, the rehabilitation of the indeterminate, the rehabilitation of the possible. So that would be like a general statement, and I would be very interested and happy if others could also chime in on this and provide further comments, because I find this personally extremely exciting and very interesting. So that's the general remark, and now goes the general concern or a general objection or a question pertaining to Whitehead's attempted solution of this. So I think that one of the possible objections to what Whitehead is doing is that perhaps, although he tries to open up the field of the possible, of the indeterminate, he seems to be doing it in a way that could open his position to the objection that he's actually actualizing the possible. So once you introduce the realm of the eternal objects, which is some sort of a Platonic realm of sorts, in a very broad, in a very specific sense, it's dubious. Whereas, you know, whereas this is not exactly like, in a certain sense, just moving a certain problem to a different level. And then a very, very important, crucial problem, when you read the chapter on abstraction, this becomes very clear, opens up. Namely, the question that he then solves by introducing God, and that is the problem of actualization or delimitation. And I am personally not one of those thinkers that would have issues with, using notions or ideas or referring to God in general, quite to the contrary. But in this particular example, I have the impression that he seems to be kind of forced somewhat into doing this in a similar manner that, for example, the early modern thinkers had to do it. So there's a certain burden that needs to be put on something akin to a God, even if it's construed in a very different way. And I think that this is a problem, not introducing God, him or her or itself into the picture. I don't have issues with that. Some people here might, quite the contrary for me. But I think that the way Whitehead does it, I'm not sure whether it's a really that much of a move away from what's been done in the early modern tradition, or as you said, a similar move can be found in Kant in a different way. So all these seem to be just, introducing something that eventually solves a very difficult problem of your system. And the problem of actualization is the problem that you constantly, you're wondering about as you're reading the chapter on abstraction. So, okay, there's this like relation between eternal objects and actual occurrences, but how the heck does this delimitation happen? What is it that determines this? What is it that, delimits the possible ingressions, or what is it that delimits the possibilities so that a very specific concrete ingression actually then occurs or manifests itself, actualizes itself as an actual occurrence? So that's a general comment, and now a general concern or an objection.
Great. I appreciate the concern. Maybe I'll hold off on responding and see what other comments folks want to make while we're still fresh off the presentation, and I'll come back to this.
Yeah, good idea.
What problem does God solve, and what new problems are created by the solution?
Matthias, you wanted to, right, say something?
I think it's quite connected to what you were raising, not so much about God. It's just a question that came up for me. So you have the eternal objects, and they have a certain hierarchy of abstractions, right? Some are more abstract, some are less, depending if you look on this realm or in this realm. And then they ingress. There's a creative synthesis, you said, or Whitehead says, that forms an actual occasion. And then my question was, do these eternal objects become so complex, right? Are they so complex that they actually are the occasion? You know what I mean? Is it like there's so many sides to the form that it becomes this like very difficult shape of a tree? You know what I mean? Is there a point where it's the eternal object is the actual occasion, or is there always a split and then God makes the thing happen that becomes the thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty here, of course, is that in any particular instance wherein we as cognitive beings are considering the realm of eternal objects, those eternal objects are, by virtue of our considering them, part of an actual occasion of experience. We can't, it's sort of like the measurement problem in quantum physics. You can't look at the realm of possibility without, in some ways, collapsing the wave function. And so are very complex eternal objects already actualized? Well, only in the sense that we're considering them as actual occasions, but in abstraction from that, for Whitehead, the reason, this is why he says eternal objects are isolated before they are actualized in some realized togetherness, which is an aesthetic achievement. They are isolated, and in a way, they're sort of just a disjunct multiplicity. They don't have any value. Whitehead says value is like, it's the matter, or he uses the Greek hule, that actuality is made of. Actuality is made of value, aesthetic value. And so until eternal objects are synthesized through some aesthetic act, they have no value. And so they remain abstract. And so it's the addition of this valuation that creates this sort of halo of relevance, where the most relevant eternal objects are those which are positively ingressed, positively prehended. And then there's this halo of receding relevance moving towards complete irrelevance, right? And so it's only through the addition of the value achieved by an actual occasion, bringing these eternal objects into some sort of aesthetic synthesis, that they become actual. So it doesn't matter how complex the eternal object is in abstraction from actuality, unless value is added to it by this aesthetic synthesis, it's not actual.
Does it change its status in that process? Does it become another something or not?
Only
it's
in the
hard
actual occasion.
yeah. Is there like some sort of a, because it sounds like these are two worlds, right?
Yes, but they're defined in terms of one another. You can't understand ideality without making reference to actuality, and vice versa. And so they're distinct but not dissociated, I guess would be one way to put it.
But Matt, could value also be an eternal object? And if so, why not? And where does it come from?
Value, yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that. But it doesn't, the possibility of value is not itself valuable, right?
Yeah.
Until it is ingressed.
But the thing is, is it even feasible to think of color or sound without it having the quality of value?
No, right? Because we are actual entities considering these possibilities and as such valuing them. And so, Whitehead's only separating value from eternal objects in abstraction, as if we weren't here considering them, but in actual fact, you can't separate the two.
I actually even have a problem like on a very, let's say, analytical or conceptual level. So I think that, on the very conceptual level, the very definition of sound cannot be given without presupposing a certain value. So I have a problem thinking of what it would mean for something to be even in the realm of possible color without having a certain value, because its quality is precisely, in a certain sense, its value. So regardless of whether I'm thinking of it or not, if this concept is to have any meaning whatsoever, in any way whatsoever, I think, I can perhaps understand this when it comes to dots and lines to a certain degree, but sound, for instance, or a note or what have you.
I think this is related to what Whitehead is saying about the impossibility of giving a exhaustive conceptual account of the physical pole. So colors and sounds, we literally cannot give a complete account in terms of concepts. We can't understand conceptually the nature of sound and color because they are just what they are. We can't understand them in terms of some other concepts. They just are what they are. You can't describe red to someone who's never experienced it, right? And so I think, your question is helping me better understand what Whitehead is meaning to say by the limits of our capacity to conceptually determine physical, the physical pole, which would include color and sound. But yeah, I mean, what about the way in which he's saying that in the realm of possibility, there are certain colors or sounds which can't coexist in actuality, but nonetheless, in the realm of possibility, they are contraries exist, right? And so it's only by virtue of actualization that you get some definite value. There's more like a chaos of possibility before something definite, some definite note is actualized. It's like a cacophony or something, you know?
Yeah, and I also, one other way that I was thinking about this is perhaps that, when you talk about eternal objects, what really comes to the fore is this formal relationality between them, so to speak. So this relational aspect is what's crucial. So what basically, in a certain sense, constitutes, among other things, the color of red, is that it occupies a certain position in a framework which defines or determines specific constituents only via and through their interrelations. So this would be then, when he talks about the distinction between systematic relations and spatial-temporal relations, which is the first limitation into the realm of the actual. So you only have these systemic relations. In a certain sense, it's almost irrelevant, what the specific thusness of something is. Like it has a certain thusness because it occupies a certain space in this framework, but it's almost non-existent without this relational essence that it also has to have. This would, in a certain sense, could provide a meaning where you don't really have value even in something like color, because you can have a color space where you don't necessarily have specific color qualities as such. And these then, in a certain sense, you might say red plays a certain role in this system by occupying us, by being co-determined with all the other relations and aspects. Perhaps I'm not sure whether that makes sense.
Yeah, I think Whitehead is saying that the individual essence of, say, red only becomes determinate when it's ingressed.
Yes, precisely. This
right?
is
Whereas when it's in the realm of
it's indeterminate.
possibilities, it's indeterminate. It's because it's defined by its internal relationships to all the other colors. There's no individual essence yet until it has been actualized and everything else has been pushed into the background. All the other colors have been pushed into the background.
Yeah, go on, Hridija.
I just had this question for clarifying something. Does Whitehead in some way also, like this cosmological doctrine, also somehow indicate, like if I talk about the frequency and the wavelength, let's say, of the color red, will that be like because of the existence of that particular frequency? Just hold a second, my mom is calling. I'll just get back to this.
I'm curious to see where that question goes, but I was reflecting on the relationship among the colors in the realm of possibility. Do you want to finish? Go ahead, finish your question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay.
So that frequency, the existence of that frequency and the occurrence of that particular frequency and wavelength, is that the occurrence of an actual event which allows the ingression of the eternal object red when it comes in, when we perceive of it? Like, is that how does that relation play a role in this context? I mean, you know.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think frequency and wavelength would refer to the spatio-temporal limitations imposed upon the realm of possibility. And so for whatever color to enter into space-time, it's limited by these measurements of frequency and wavelength and so on. However, when I was thinking about, like the polemic between Newton and Goethe as regards the nature of color, typically when philosophers have considered how colors are related to one another abstractly, they think of it in terms of this gradient, like the Newtonian spectrum of visible colors. And so then there would be a continuous sort of shading off of one color into the next in the order of the rainbow. However, if you consider in terms of the abstractive hierarchy of color, if you consider this from a Goethean point of view, it's all the colors are not equally basic. For Goethe, there are certain colors which are of primary importance in an archetypal sense, like blue and yellow, for example. These would be, I think, at the base of the Goethean color abstractive hierarchy, because the proximate color would be green, which emerges when blue and yellow mix, right? Actually, before blue and yellow, there's just light and dark. When light and dark mix, blue and yellow are the first to appear. And when blue and yellow mix, then green appears, and so on. And so, it got me thinking about how we understand color in abstraction from its ingression into space-time, depending on whether or not we accept the Goethean point of view or the Newtonian point of view. The nature of the abstract relation among the colors is going to be different, right? Rather, in the Newtonian point of view, all the colors are on the base of the abstractive hierarchy, right? They're equally simple. Whereas from Goethe's point of view, some colors are more complex, right, than others. And so, I don't know necessarily where to go with that, except to say that it raises an interesting question.
Sure. Yeah. Miha.
I have a question, I guess, regarding Whitehead's later on developing this notion of eternal objects. And as I remember correctly, in processing reality, he doesn't use the term realm of eternal objects. So I guess, is it then just merely a welter of eternal objects? Does he continue on with this kind of understanding of eternal objects, or is it still a realm, right? He just doesn't mention it as such. I mean, because from the standpoint of the eternal objects being interconnected, right, amongst each other, one would assume it's still, I guess, a kind of realm, right? Or is it because God then plays a role there, right, with his one of his poles? I forget. Is it
A primordial nature?
Yes, yes.
Or the conceptual pole. So here's how I think of it. If we were to consider possibility in abstraction, even from the divine limitation, it would be a mere disjunct multiplicity. We couldn't even call it a set of possibilities. That's to give it too much order. It's just multiplicity. And the role of the divine in the primordial nature of God is by envisaging the realm of possibility. Well, actually, sorry, I shouldn't say realm. By envisioning possibility, God turns possibility into a realm. It becomes a realm when it's no longer just disjunct multiplicity, but there's an actual ordering, a systematic scheme of relationship among all the possibilities or eternal objects as a result of the divine envisagement or the divine valuation, right? And so the realm-like nature, I think, Whitehead just uses the primordial nature of God.
And that also connects with so Whitehead at one point mentions that the law of non-contradiction applies only after a thing, an eternal object, has already become realized. Yeah, which would actually connect nicely with this. I'm just not sure how, because intuitionism is famous for this insistence that it's not valid to infer to prove mathematical theorems based on the tertium non datur law, so that you kind of prove the absurdity of the opposite of what you want to prove. I mean, think of the famous proof of the irrationality of the root of 2, right? Which is this kind of proof. But they basically say that this disjunction, so the A or not A is always true, has meaning only after we have constructed one of these objects. So either A or not A, not after we've proven that one of them is just inconsistent. So if you check this quote I sent, I think this is the same. But the interesting thing here is that intuitionism, and Brouwer in particular, would actually interpret this relationship, this acquisition of truth and falsehood, in a sociological realm, right? It is because mathematics is social activity that the propositions which are going to be constructed and thus proved in the future cannot really kind of be anticipated in this way that mathematicians almost, for the most part, actually do. Nowadays, this is always often interpreted in terms of computability, because it seems that the construction side of intuitionism connects well with the possibility of a computation, right? So that you're able to construct a program which is going to so run out a specific series of constructions. But with Whitehead, this is supposedly something that happens despite the social activity or despite the computers doing their own thing, something that exists before. I'm not really sure how to connect the two, because I started reading this text with the relationship between Whitehead and Russell and Frege in mind. I was expecting, okay, so he's not gonna go this way, right? So the law of excluded middle, that's gonna hold, right? But then I read about this, non-contradiction applies only when something is actualized. And I thought, okay, so does this include the construction of mathematical objects, or is there something different at play? But even then, one could ask, and I think this could be a fruitful question to address. In what way can we say that external objects exist? I don't know if he addresses this anywhere. Maybe I missed it, but we somehow, like Dustin Hoffman clip, he was speaking about everything that is here. And that's actually it's a true statement, right? Everything that is actualized, and it is here. But eternal objects, in what way do they exist? Because I would say that if one understands this relationship between truth and falsehood in this kind of more mathematical, intuitionistic way, then the way the eternal objects can exist alters, at least in my perception, a little bit, right? It becomes a bit different. It becomes something more possible, that the existence of eternal objects is the possibility of them existing at all, or somehow like that. So that there is, and the existence of eternal object is possible, but that would mean that they don't really exist. Or is the question posed in the wrong way? I'm not really sure how to address, but yeah, two parts. So
Hey, Matt, before you answer this question, I would just like to add to what Izak was pointing out in the first part. I think that this is a really important point, and we haven't really touched upon it. But precisely this, there's a whole plethora of thinkers who put a lot of emphasis on the constructive endeavor of either individuals or cultures or what have you, and they are, this plays a crucial role in the actualization, so to speak, or constitution or what have you, and also of opening up certain domains and spheres and horizons of possibility. But with Whitehead, this kind of, it's not really addressed. Like it's swallowed up by the whole actualization process that's depicted. And I just wonder, how does this play into the overall scheme? That's one question. And it's all basically related to what Izak was asking. So these are not separate questions. And, is there something different still with human activity? Because it would seem that, unlike, for example, the animal that lives in its own Umwelt, say, it has its own milieu, and it's somehow, as Scheler say, it's ensnared. It's ensnared by the things that it is surrounded with. So with humans, there seems to be the capacity of reflection, which is precisely this capacity to pause and alter and modify your point of view, and thereby alter also the configurations within you choose and how you choose. And in a certain sense, it would seem that perhaps this is where the possible really enters the picture. So the question is, this emphasis on action, construction, building, development, constitution, what have you. Whitehead talks about synthesis, but it is a broad metaphysical concept which seems to hold true for everything. So yeah, if you could, say a few words on that, if you also, if he also touches upon this maybe in other works.
Yeah, I mean, the broader context for Whitehead would be an evolutionary process that gives rise to more and more intense forms of valuation. And so as the intensity ramps up because of the complexity of the organisms that emerge, there's a greater capacity to sort of dip into the realm of potential, to consider alternatives. In other words, when we're talking about very low-grade actual occasions, inorganic entities, particles and rocks and so on, there's not much in the way of consideration of alternative possibilities to what's inherited from the past. Whereas when you get into the higher animals and human beings capable of mathematical reflection, I mean, in the latter case, with mathematicians, we don't know the limit yet in terms of how far into the realm of possibility we can reach. I mean, mathematicians have classified all these different forms of infinity already, and so it seems like in the human being, mathematics has allowed us to break through into this realm of eternal objects that for other animals it's not possible. And we have a whole sociological and institutional and symbolic scaffolding that supports this activity. It's not just something we do because our brains are really complex. We need all of this this extended apparatus, the history of mathematics, all the various symbolisms that have been brought forth to support this kind of cognition. But okay, so one of the things that becomes relevant in the course of evolution is, like, at what point does error become possible? Error, if for an organism to make an error, implies that it's considering possibilities relevant to what's actual. Does a rock make mistakes? I don't think so. But a human being certainly can, because of the degree to which we have access to these alternative possibilities. We can ingress an eternal object that, strictly speaking, is not a true representation of, the physical entity that we're claiming to have knowledge of. And so it's the possibility of error that is sort of signaling this deepening relationship to the realm of possibilities. Now, in terms of the law of non-contradiction and what changes after possibilities ingress, the way that one of the physicists I'm reading currently, Tim Eastman, talks about this is the realm of actuality can be characterized in Boolean terms, in a sort of true, false, 1, 0 kind of account, because after possibilities have actualized, there's a determinateness to them. Whereas in the realm of possibility, say when we're talking about the quantum realm, Boolean logic doesn't apply anymore. It's only after measurement has been made that we can apply such a logic. And so the challenge is, the challenge presented by quantum theory and the reintroduction of possibility into metaphysics is, what is the logic by which we can think this realm? We can't think it in a Boolean way. We have to think about it it's a fuzzier kind of logic, right? Where as you were saying, Seb, like clarity and distinction is only in reference to actualized possibilities, whereas possibilities as such exist in this hazy cloud of contradictory. They exist in potential contradiction with one another. And so Whitehead is offering one possible logic of possibility, one analysis of this realm of unrealized possibilities, and he's very much still trying to work it out in science in the modern world. And I don't know that it is possible to fully grasp what he's doing without having read Process and Reality, where he gets a little bit clearer on some of these things. And I was reviewing the journal Process Studies and the various attempts to make sense of this chapter, and there's a lot of disagreement among Whitehead scholars here. And so it remains an open question on that front. But the reason for Whitehead that he wants to, one of the reasons he's making reference to the realm of possibilities is precisely to be able to justify the openness of the future. Dustin Hoffman was describing a sort of Einsteinian block universe, right, where the future is not radically open because everything is simply internally related to everything else. Whitehead wants to say internal relations are very important, but there's also external relations, right? The present is externally related to the future in the sense that it's an indeterminate relationship. And so, part of this logical exercise for him is an effort to leave room for not only human freedom, but the creativity of the evolutionary process. All right, the past is determined. The present is internally related to the past, but externally related to the future. And so, yeah, we can't make discrete true false statements about the future for this reason. So I appreciate Izak bringing that Brewer quote in there. That's definitely consistent with what Whitehead is arguing for, as I understand it.
Yeah, but Matt, that this kind of, in a certain sense, brings us back to the question about how does one construe, how does one conceptualize or think about the possible, the virtual, the indeterminate. Now, Whitehead takes a very specific route, and I still think that there might be a problem there, precisely because him being a mathematician, I think he kind of builds it up or erects it as a Platonist of sorts, and sees it in at least to me, it seems that way, in a very determinist way. In a certain sense, clare distincte would apply, if to anything, precisely to the realm of the possible. It is there where you can basically play mathematics, so to speak, in the most rigorous, in the most determinate sense. But before you answer this, so there were other attempts where authors actually try to think of the possible by, toying around with like radically different concepts, where indeterminate would be more, how do I put this? Like, it would be taken more seriously in the sense of, for example, when you talk about the notion of a field, it seems that there is a certain very strong indeterminance present there, which cannot be even kind of conceptualized in a way that Whitehead tries to do. So there is a certain openness that's there in a different sense, with Whitehead, I still have this impression. So let me draw an analogy, perhaps. So when Merleau-Ponty criticizes Husserl, he says that when Husserl brought us back to the Lebenswelt, so to the life world, the domain of lived experience, where you have things that are not given or that are not modeled on the ground or on the model of, say, a geometrical thing, where you have things that are also practical things and also domains that are indeterminate, such as the horizon or the background and whatnot. That that was the move in the right direction. But then Husserl almost, I'm adding almost, although from my readings, I would say that he always does it, not almost always, but always does it. He insists on additional reduction, where you would kind of reduce this Lebenswelt to how the transcendental ego constitutes even these seemingly indeterminate aspects. So you would get something that would be determinate eventually. Husserl needs some sort of apodictic something, yeah. So apodicticity for Husserl is extremely important, is crucial, whereas Merleau-Ponty wants to let go of this. And with Whitehead, I see something similar to what Husserl is doing. Both of them were mathematicians, so they always add an extra step where they need to have this, the realm of the possible. So the realm of the possible is the realm of the eternal objects, and it's a realm of systematic relations, and these systematic relations are determinate. They're determinate, and they are basically very mathematic in nature, regardless of how we think about them. And for example, this is something that seems to be very much akin to what I've just said, in relation to Husserl. He also wanted to have this constitutional realm of the transcendental that would somehow, dispel all the unclarities, all the vagueness. Whereas for Merleau-Ponty, for example, this vagueness or indeterminacy would be constitutive of everything that is explicit and determinate. So you really need to have it there. And the thing is that you need to posit it as, say, a third realm of being between nothing and a thing. So it's neither a nothing, it's neither a thing, it's a no thing, because it's, say, a field or something like that. I'm just kind of simplifying here. I don't know if if you understand what I'm getting at with regards to the realm of the possible and the possible problems with Whiteheadian conception of the possible.
Let me approach it this way, in terms of physics and cosmology and the way we think about laws. Whitehead, in Adventures of Ideas, he talks about different approaches to law. And the two most important are law as imposed and law as imminent. And imposed law would be like Newton or Descartes, where God's role is to impose laws on the actual course of events in nature, determining how actual things behave, right? So it's a deterministic account of law as imposed by the divine architect, that determines the behavior of actual things. Whitehead points out that science may never have emerged without this sort of theological presupposition that God was the lawmaker. But on the other hand, it's obviously problematic to make this assumption, given Whitehead's account of actuality as this system of internal relationships among actual occasions. He wants to see laws as sort of emergent habits that come out of the mutual interaction of the relata. So rather than law being imposed and the things being related have no intrinsic relationship to one another, Whitehead says, no, all actuality is internally related. And so law is sort of like the statistical habits that emerges out of their behavior. But he says there still needs to be this principle of limitation. But in Whitehead's scheme, God does not impose laws on actuality. God imposes laws on possibility. Because without any limitation on the realm of possibility, there never could have been anything actual. I mean, this is Whitehead's claim. Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, because God imposed a limit on the infinite realm of possibility such that something definite could arise. And so Whitehead's move is to say that, yes, there are these determinate relations among the eternal objects because of the primordial envisagement of the divine, limiting possibility. But then all of the more specific laws that emerge are historical habits, right? They're not deterministic. And in contemporary cosmology, the way to think of this would be that Whitehead's primordial nature of God establishes constraints on possibility. And some of the most basic constraints would include just these geometrical principles of, how wholes relate to parts. And all of the laws of physics unfold from there in a contingent way, right? And so Whitehead's, in a sense, trying to provide some constraint on possibility, but not on and that is a constraint on actuality, but it doesn't determine how the actual universe unfolds. And so, yes, he does want this, he does make reference to this kind of, geometrical, apodicticity in the sense that there's some foundational order provided by the divine out of which a cosmos would emerge. And he's doing this little maneuver to distinguish between determination of possibility versus determination of actuality. It's what distinguishes his view from the Newtonian clockwork universe. But there's still a role to play, a role for the divine to play in constraining possibility. So I don't know, does this speak at all to what you're...
Yeah, for sure. I think that the problem of delimitation in general, is, in a certain sense, the more I think about things, it's really like crucial. How does it happen that any delimitation occurs whatsoever? I think that as a trite and trivial it may sound, but eventually you get to this question: why is there something rather than nothing, as being a crucial question of philosophy. So the delineation is crucial. So yeah, Hridija, I think that you first.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, as an alternative, instead of bringing God into the context here, like, why? Because the process and the relational narratives and everything is already in place for Whitehead. I mean, sort of in place. And the limitations in a particular actual occasion would happen because of the previous occasions, and then because of the nature of the process itself and the conditions surrounding that process. For example, the boiling of water at 100 degrees. I don't know why I'm just giving examples from science textbooks, but like at the boiling temperature for water, and under those conditions only that can happen. There aren't many possibilities of what other things can happen. It's already limited by conditions and by the previous occasions of bringing into that temperature and making that thing happen. So I was thinking, like, is it not like the order is emergent from the process itself, like it's inherited by the process itself rather than yeah. So I just couldn't understand, like, what is the relation with the concept of God that Whitehead talks about, and this inherent power of the process itself to create this order and limiting itself based on every occurrence that happened.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so Whitehead says that God's different from every other actual entity in that God does not have a past to emerge out of. God sets the original limit that makes possible this process of inheritance for other occasions. So God's primordial in the sense that, you know, this initial divine envisagement doesn't have an actual world to refer to. It provides, it is itself the reference point for finite actual occasions to establish some sense of order. And so I wonder if, I think that last slide that I didn't talk about might be relevant here, what I called Whitehead's aesthetic argument for the existence of God. I want to share that right now. I think it might be helpful. So you can see the slide now. Can you all see this slide? Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is all from page 179, where Whitehead says, restriction is the price of value. There cannot be value without antecedent standards of value to discriminate the acceptance or rejection of what is before the envisaging mode of activity. Thus, there is an antecedent limitation among values, introducing contraries, grades, and oppositions. According to this argument, the fact that there is a process of actual occasions and the fact that the occasions are the emergent values which require such limitation, both require that the course of events should have developed amid an antecedent limitation composed of conditions, particularization, and standards of value. Thus, as a further element in the metaphysical situation, there is required a principle of limitation. Some particular how is necessary, and some particularization in the what of matter of fact is necessary. The only alternative to this admission is to deny the reality of actual occasions. Their apparent irrational limitation must be taken as a proof of illusion, and we must look for reality behind the scene. If we reject this alternative behind the scene, we must provide a ground for limitation which stands among the attributes of the substantial activity. This attribute provides the limitation for which no reason can be given, for all reason flows from it. God is the ultimate limitation, and his existence is the ultimate irrationality, for no reason can be given for just that limitation which it stands in his nature to impose. So I don't know that this is satisfying to someone who would be of a kind of atheistic bent of mind, but Whitehead is just coming out and admitting that for us to have the ability to discriminate any actual entity, right, to have any finite knowledge of anything at all, it presupposes this antecedent limitation upon the realm of possibilities, and that this limitation is the ground of rationality, but itself is irrational. You can't provide a ground for the ground, right? And so this is, you know, what I'm calling Whitehead's aesthetic argument for the existence of God. And it's trying to answer that question, why there is something rather than nothing. And I don't know. I mean, is it satisfying or not? It's an aesthetic question ultimately.
Yeah, the thing is, from a strictly philosophical, metaphysical point of view, it doesn't really fair that it's not doing that worse than, say, any of the contemporary secular versions of how the cosmos came to be, and how it's structured with regards to some of the contingent facts about it. So it's, yeah.
Everyone needs one free miracle, right?
Yeah, perhaps so. Izak, you wanted to say something, right?
Yeah, I was thinking some more about what you said about Husserl and Whitehead being mathematicians. And I actually read an article a while ago about the debate Whitehead had with Poincaré at the Congress for Mathematics and Philosophy in Paris at the beginning of 20th century, sometime, I don't know. So basically they didn't agree about everything, but they did agree that the formalization one had to begin to construct at the beginning of 20th century, because mathematics was so big. One had to do that, but they didn't capture really the intuitive character of mathematics. There was always something more, like the formalization always came afterwards. Because what I would like to stress is there are, of course, three ways we can understand mathematics, right? One is this prehistoric, ancient. So you have mathematics, which is by itself, even though it's not completely formalized, it's constructed so we can understand it, so we can follow it, so it's Platonic and we can trust in it. But then, of course, this wish to formalize it arises, right? And people start being very unplatonistic Platonists about what mathematics is, right? So there are these things called exist by themselves, and things exist by themselves as structures in the somewhere. But now the thing I feel is one should underscore is that Whitehead would not agree with these people, right? So you don't have a complete formal system of eternal objects that exist somewhere, and they're eternal because they're consistent with each other, they're formal, they're complete. The internal relationships are the formal relationships they bear with each other, because that would actually actualize the potential and the potential character of these eternal objects. And of course, then Gödel came to mind, right? Because actually he did not prove that mathematics was inconsistent, just that any formal foundations of mathematics is bound to include statements which cannot be proved within a chosen system. So, but nevertheless, he remained a Platonist, right? So there seems to be this another aspect to mathematics, which is intuitive and which is not this naive formalization that has to be consistent, but actually that exists potentially as that which exceeds the actualized formalization. I don't really know how to interpret this. This is of course the problem, but I just wanted to point out that maybe Husserl and Whitehead shared a certain intuition about that there's something more than formalization there, right? There is mathematics, which is not the mathematics everybody wants to do. And of course, then when one asks, okay, so what is the crucial factor for making these potential mathematics an actual mathematics? It's actually a choice of a formal system, right? Which can be influenced by a myriad of other factors. So like I don't know, social pressures, I don't know, aesthetic pleasures on some specific way, I don't know, now computability and relatedness to programming languages. And perhaps that could be a different way of then the value in choosing a formal system which actualizes the potential mathematics would precede anything else. So the value would be the primordial element. I don't know if that's how God gets into the picture here, but maybe that would kind of point to a way of understanding Whitehead, which would not presuppose that there's this naive Platonistic mathematics or even the scheme of potential elements out there, but that they're really in this, they're just possible, that they don't really exist as a schema or anything like that. I don't know if I was clear enough.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of how Plato conceives of mathematics as sort of intermediate between the sensible and intelligible realms. Like there's a higher knowledge beyond mathematics, which can't be formalized, right? It's known only through this intuitive participation. Nonetheless, mathematics gets us closest to that. And I think Whitehead initially with Russell thought he could formalize math and then gave up on that project. And Gödel would later prove why that project had to fail. And I think so earlier in his career, Whitehead would have disagreed with Poincaré about this, but I think later on Whitehead accepts more and more the intuitive dimension of mathematics, and also the sort of contingent application of different geometries to nature. And I think, like Russell wanted there to be one true geometry that described nature, whereas Whitehead accepted this more later on when he started doing metaphysics after relativity theory emerged, that there's a conventional interpretation at play here. Different geometries can give us insight into the nature of the physical world depending on what we're interested in knowing. There's no sense in saying that nature only takes one geometrical, is only realized according to one geometry. There are many geometries that can be applied to the physical world. That would be Whitehead's later position. Yeah.
And also, maybe I would like to add something here, something I was reminded of while Izak was talking about these questions and these issues. In the prose of the world, the unfinished work by Merleau-Ponty, Merleau-Ponty basically kind of tries to show that the structure that you find in the domain of perception, so the dynamics and the structure of perception, is something that you will also find in other realms, even in the relationships among something. But he says that whenever you look at these formalizations from the historical perspective, you always see that eventually, like, there is the transformation that occurs, and that they are always surrounded by the halo of the possible. So, just to mention again, like this famous example of whenever you see an object, you see always a certain actuality, which is a certain profile that is given to you, but the object is never given like this, but as merely this actuality, or say a cognitive summation of possible actualities that you see if you turn the object around. The virtual, the possible, what is not given, is always co-present. So there is this element of the possibility or the virtual that in a certain sense is just as real as the actual, what is given. And the same would apply also to mathematics. So when you have a formalized system, you do not get away from there being a certain something that kind of transcends it, So there is this domain of the virtuality that this is an actualization of. And even when you're working in that particular system, you're always in a certain sense going beyond it. So eventually you're going to try to re-articulate something, and this will change. So how this pans out and what this means, it's a different and another question, but just something I was reminded of as Izak was talking about these things. So yeah, I mean, one last point, and I don't think I would be able to really articulate this particularly well, but it would seem to me that, you know, the thing that Merleau-Ponty was trying to do in his last work, so that when he was developing the notion of the flesh and Chiasmos and Verflechtung and whatnot, when he was developing these ideas, that this was precisely an attempt to develop or outline a system that would be very similar to a Whiteheadian system, but without the realm of the eternal objects, and also then with the realm of God, at least as construed by Whitehead. So I'm just pointing this out as a potential alternative, you know, because I don't see that it's necessarily true what Whitehead is saying on the slide that you provided, that you have this tertium non datur situation. So either you kind of fall into some version of, say, of some version of naturalist objectivism, reductionism, what have you, okay? Or you have to endorse something that is similar to what he's proposing. I would argue that there were authors that were trying to develop a middle way position there that would say that Whitehead is, in a certain sense still a prisoner to the things that he is trying to undermine, so that he's still, in a certain sense, only halfway between truly embracing what we're forced to embrace with the developments in science and philosophy and the implosion of the traditional system, so to speak, and that he doesn't go far enough. Now, I'm not sure whether it's really possible to completely dodge or avoid, you know, any talk of God. And again, I'm not against doing that. It's just that at least in this particular book, and, you know, I have to admit, I haven't read Process and Reality. So, you know, my knowledge is extremely faulty, but merely judging my thoughts on what we've read here, I don't find it, you know, particularly satisfying.
Whitehead's presentation is faulty. I mean, this Science of the Mind, it's very much a work in progress when he's writing this book. And it's as if the process of concrescence remains incomplete. He publishes this book anyway. I mean, and it's, you know, it's still valuable, but he's very much on the way to a more coherent scheme, and I think lays it out more clearly. His presentation in Process and Reality is better, still not great, but better. And I guess, you know, there are many Whiteheadians, like someone like Ralph Pred comes to mind, who tries to reinterpret and kind of hack Whitehead's scheme so that it can work without making reference to eternal objects, without making reference to God, where somehow Pred tries to preserve possibility and potentiality as in terms of the creativity of actual occasions alone. And as far as I can tell, you know, he may as well just not use Whitehead's categories anymore. It's almost like, I mean, an analogy that I've used is thinking of a magnet with a north and a south pole. For Whitehead, there's a sort of, the analogy to his mode of explanation would be to a magnet where, you know, actuality always presupposes a reference to ideality. Actual occasions only make sense in reference to eternal objects. And if you try to get rid of eternal objects, it's like trying to break the magnet in half to get rid of the negative pole. When you break the magnet, a new negative pole is just going to reappear. In other words, maybe you're not calling them eternal objects, but you're basically still having to make reference to this other type of entity aside from actual things. You're just sneaking it in instead of explicitly acknowledging it. That's what I think ends up happening with Pred and others who want to work within Whitehead's scheme and take out parts of it. You know, it's like trying to break the magnet in half. You're not really going to be able to succeed. You may as well just start off fresh with new categories. And so, you know, can we understand a universe that's not deterministic without making reference to a realm of unrealized potentials? That would be the question. Whitehead thought no. And so after having accepted that there is this realm of unrealized potentials, his next question was, well, where is that realm? And that's where God comes into the picture. That is, eternal objects don't just float into the world from nowhere. They're already housed, as it were, in the mind of God, and God is another actual entity.
Maybe that's the problem, you know, couching it in this particular terms, it kind of predisposes you to answer in a very specific way. Like you said, you know, you in terms of housing and in terms of the awareness, so to speak. So, you know, I think that in general, there's a lot of valuable stuff there for sure. But I think that, yeah, it definitely needs to be analyzed and investigated carefully. One further question, this envisagement, Matt, this envisagement. So could you perhaps say a few words on it? And I was particularly wondering how, you know, when we were talking about actual occasions, and then you said that there's a certain polarity, or again, a certain codetermination between two poles, where you had the physical pole and the mental pole, so to speak, if I oversimplify somewhat. Would envisagement somehow be related to this to the psychological or mental pole, in the sense of that you would have gradations of cognitive, I don't know even what the term would be, but synchronizing with the envisagement of God? So that there has to be like a certain, almost like a gradation or a hierarchy of approaching this envisagement, at least if I understand this correctly. And what would be the highest level? Would this be something like a unio mystica, something like a, you know, contemplatio, the pure contemplatio, the pure mind of Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic of the 13th or 14th century, who, by the way, had a very interesting processual conception of God. So, you know, just curious if you could, because again, envisagement is just another term that Whitehead basically throws into his story, but doesn't really account for.
Yeah, so it's, Eckhart has this phrase, the eye through which I see God is, the eye through which God sees me is the eye through which I see God. Is that it? So the divine envisagement, or what he later calls the primordial nature of God, is God's perfect realization of the realm of possibilities. So it's the kingdom of heaven. So it's the most perfect world that there could be. And when mystics have this contemplative encounter with the Godhead, this is what they are seeing. And this perfection, this ideal perfection envisaged by the divine, is ingredient in it. It participates in every drop of experience in the whole history of the cosmos, and provides a contrast. It doesn't, this God's envisagement of possibility does not determine how actual occasions interpret their experience, but it provides a lure, right? It's Whitehead uses the phrase divine eros, which is, this is the element, the divine element included in the finite actual world, which is what It's his explanation for why there is a tilt towards complexity in the sense that entropy does not reign. There's an accumulation of novelty and complexification, because Whitehead says there's this ideal of perfection that is luring but not determining how actual entities decide to interpret their experience. And so it not only provides this function of a limitation on possibility, it provides an explanation for why there is order and not chaos in the world. But also, the order in the world is obviously not total. There's plenty of chaos in the actual world as well. And that's because God's limitation on possibility is not determining what gets actualized. There's a lot of wiggle room, for actual occasions to make their own determination as to what's relevant, which possibilities are relevant to their experience. So God is, in a way, what mediates between pure creativity and finite actuality. Finite actualities still are subject to this creative advance, right? Whitehead calls it a principle of unrest. But nonetheless, they have this divine aid in sort of filtering creativity so that there's a sense of what are the relevant possibilities for each finite drop of experience. Because it's like a lot of the mystics will talk about this vision of the divine as so overwhelming and sublime that, like Dante says something like, I ascended to that height and memory failed to follow me, in the sense that now that I'm back in my normal experience, he knew that he couldn't even remember how glorious it was, right? And so we can't in any way fully actualize the ideal that God is eternally envisaging, but nonetheless, that ideal is there as this kind of base note that contributes by way of contrast to what we do actually experience. That's how I understand it, at least.
That's very interesting. Yeah, extremely so.
And Whitehead does continue to use this term envisagement in Process and Reality, but he tries out other alternatives like divine intuition or divine vision, and he admits that each one has shortcomings and associations he doesn't intend, and so he unpacks this further in Process and Reality.
Nice. Okay, maybe one last question before we wrap this up. Okay, seems that we've exhausted both math and the topic itself. Hey, thanks, Matt. Again, this was really, really helpful and very illuminating. Both the presentation and the answers, extremely valuable. So thank you. Really.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I do welcome alternative interpretations. Seb, thanks for sending that blog post that I wrote, in preparation for this. So, if anyone in reading that over feels like, oh, I didn't see it that way, or I thought this was what he was saying, we can continue this over email. Sure. I'm not certain that my interpretations are correct. I'll put it that way. And so I welcome other alternatives.
Matthew, you need to work on your envisagement.
Yeah. I'll go
you have
practice
to
that
up
now.
your envisagement. So next time we're reading the last two sections, right? And it's Adnan's term, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's almost impossible, but we're nearing the end.
Amazing.
Amazing indeed. Yeah, Adnan, any comments or any last words?
I mean, the one thing that sort of stood out to me was the question of the relationship between Whitehead's God and Kant's ideal of pure reason. But that's, I think, a whole different can of worms, maybe right now.
But maybe we can open it next time. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Or at least maybe, you can outline it now and we can get into it after your presentation. Maybe you can somehow, include it also.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of the way I saw it is that it seems that God for Whitehead is on the metaphysical level, that what the ideal of pure reason is for Kant on the epistemological level. Because of course, Kant talks about the ideal of pure reason in the context of the ontological argument. But he says we're only dealing with relations between ideas. We can't use that, even though the mind has to sort of presuppose the ideal of pure reason. That doesn't yet mean that the ideal of pure reason exists as a sort of ens perfectis, ens realissimum. I think he also uses the term ens summum. So, basically the sum of all possible predicates, all possible realities. So I think there are some similarities there, but then again, some important differences too, because Kant is talking about, first of all, the epistemological level, and also he's talking about the fact that there has to be some sort of totality of all possible realities out of which we choose particular ones whenever we determine anything, whenever we talk about anything. So both are talking about some sort of limitation, but on different levels and in different ways. So
yeah,
maybe we can get to that.
Yeah, well said. And I think ultimately, and we should return to this next time, ultimately Whitehead's issue is just that he doesn't think we can engage in epistemology effectively without already having made all sorts of ontological presuppositions. And so he's trying to find a way to approach the question of knowledge and the question of being in the same analysis, right? That's why I refer to it as an ontoepistemic justification of metaphysics, because it's as valuable as Kant's exercise was. He does end up kind of running aground for various reasons, and Whitehead was aware of that. Whitehead has the benefit of looking at all three of the critiques as a whole. Kant was writing about the transcendental ideal of reason just in the first critique and didn't quite see where it was headed. And in any event, yeah, Whitehead wants to hold together ontology and epistemology because they're co-implicated. You can't say one without presupposing something about the other.
So at least in that sense, Whitehead is to Kant what Heidegger is to Husserl. Basically.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, that was precisely one of the main critiques directed against Kant, also from people like Merleau-Ponty and Plessner, who basically said that Kant at a certain point forgot the very fact that he wanted to start from the actuality and the structure of experience, and that this is the thing that delimits and eventually he submitted experience to, say, reason or rational category, so to speak. So he started working in the opposite direction, whereas with Whitehead as well, when you talk about actual occasions, you have precisely this, like the actuality as it's given in the direct concreteness, the most direct concreteness, and this is something that in a certain sense is what determines. Anyway, we can maybe touch upon this, but that was a really good
thank you.
Okay, so see you next time. That's in 2 weeks, right?
Okay. Yeah, 30th.
Okay,
Perfect.
be well. Ciao.
Take care, everyone.